Let's take a look at the war on drugs, right? I mean, it's been declared probably 20 times in the last 20 years or so. Every couple of years it's declared. It's declared against a background of understanding. For example, it was studied years ago by the RAND Corporation, the main government advisory corporation, and the Army, in which they investigated just straight cost-benefit analysis of various ways of treating the drug problem. Drug problem's here, it's not in Colombia. So they said, well, which ways of dealing with the problem here are cost-effective? And they found, which will surprise no one who's paid attention to the history, that the most cost-effective way of doing it is prevention and treatment. Okay? In fact, if you think about it, that's the way one of the worst drug problems has been handled. I mean, there is a drug which is much worse than cocaine. It's called tobacco. It kills far more people than cocaine does. And it was handled pretty well by cultural change. So if you look through the 1980s, it's a class issue. So people with education and degree of privilege simply adopted a more healthy lifestyle. They stopped smoking, they stopped eating red meat, they didn't drink as much coffee, and so on. There were no police, nobody carried out chemical warfare in North Carolina and Kentucky to destroy tobacco fields. It was simply an educational process, a kind of cultural change that led to a significant decline of the use of, by far, the most dangerous drug among people who were a part of that cultural change that took place thanks to their privilege. Okay, now that's exactly what the RAND and the Army studied years ago. They were, of course, discussing tobacco, but that's exactly what they concluded about hard drugs or marijuana. They said the cheapest and the most effective way of dealing with it is prevention and treatment. Well, there's another way, use of police. Okay, that's much less effective and much more costly. There's a third way, interdiction at the borders. That's still more expensive by quite a large margin and far less and far more costly. And the worst way of all, way more costly than anything else and totally ineffective, is what we call fumigation, but what in fact is chemical warfare. I've been down to southern Colombia and seen some of it. It's chemical warfare, which is driving huge numbers of peasants off their land, destroying their crops. Colombia has the second biggest refugee problem in the world after Sudan. And they're driven into urban slums, and multinational corporations come in and start mining, and so on and so forth. That's the least effective and the most costly. And, the fact that we do it, again, if you can kind of abstract yourself and pretend you're a Martian looking at this, is just kind of unimaginable. I mean, the number of people in Colombia killed by U.S. tobacco is way beyond the number of Americans killed by Colombian cocaine. If you go to a country like China, it's astronomically more. Okay, do they have a right to come to the United States and carry out chemical warfare in North Carolina and Kentucky because they have a tobacco problem and it's coming from here? Yeah, I mean, you can't even speak the words. It's so outlandish. But we do it and we think it's just fine. Even though it's known to be the least effective, the most costly, and totally immoral, as we see right away if we think of the situation reversed. Well, that's been going on for decades. That's the war on drugs. It hasn't affected the use of drugs here at all.